Fatima. So is the
Yeah.
message of Fatima and Fatima, is that still going on? Is that something that's like ended, or like what's the deal with Fatima?
I think we had one of our Sunday afternoon conversations about this back in 2014.
It probably did come up.
No, because at the time I had just heard an account that was given to me of the consecrations from the 1980s, of a kind of back and forth that was going on between Sister Lucia and Cardinal Sodano and Pope John Paul II. And it seems like to me there's two issues always with Fatima. One issue is this issue of the consecrations and the various popes. And it seems like if you look at all the different consecrations, uh, there hasn't been any consecration that like fulfilled exactly to the letter, to the T, what Our Lady asked for. Every pope kind of failed in one way or another. Every pope a little bit has been like Moses hitting the rock twice, right? So that the water could come out. But actually, I have a friend, Robert Sungenis. He and I had been going back and forth about Fatima and the consecrations, really going back to 2014, 2015. And he's done a lot of research, and he's actually changed his opinion by looking at letters and correspondence that has come out, and just even in the last 3 or 4 years, between Sister Lucia and various priests and the popes, basically saying that, well, there's two aspects to Fatima. One is the consecrations, and the consecrations as they could lead to the conversion of Russia. And then the other aspect is the prayer and penance that's being asked of us so as to prevent terrible things from happening in the church and in the world. And the conclusion of the research that Robert Sungenis has done and is that you can go all the way back to 1937, and you can find Lucia complaining in some of her letters, complaining in a good spirit, in a good sense, that Our Lady was telling her that the popes have been slow in doing the consecrations, and that, but eventually, Lucia says in one of her letters that eventually the popes will do the consecrations, and because they've delayed, there will be a war, and the war will go longer than it should, but it'll start the process of the conversion of Russia. But then you also find, so there were consecrations done in the 1940s and the 1950s, and each one of these consecrations lacked something as far as what Our Lady wanted. But you can see already by the 1950s the beginning of a change. It's gradual. It's like the seeds growing in the ground. It's like the mustard seed, right? That you start to see a gradual change in Russia, a lessening of the anti-Catholic persecution, some efforts to open up to the Vatican, the ability to recognize the Feast of Easter again, the allowing of the churches to have Mass. And this culminates, of course, in, I think, what we might talk about it a little bit later on, if not yet the conversion, but certainly signs that are pointing in that direction. The other message, though, of Fatima, and we see this already in the late 1950s, where continuing in the late 1950s, there's a repeated prayer that there's a repeated message that Lucia repeats all the way up to her death, is that we need to do prayer and penance, right? We need to recommit ourselves to prayer and penance in order to basically avoid disaster in the church, but also to make acts of reparation for all the potentially terrible things that could happen both in the church and in the world. So that's where the title of Robert Sungenis's book is Fatima Fulfilled, but Still Foreboding. Because I think there's still this message of prayer and penance that we see. That's the foreboding aspect of Fatima, that aspect of the message is still very much, still very relevant. and it's still very, I think we see it in our own times, very important.
So there were seeds and signs of Russia coming along. I was under the impression that JP2 didn't. Wasn't there like a controversy there? Like he did it, and then there was something wrong. Maybe all the bishops weren't there, but then they went
Yeah.
into like the heart of Russia, and he had like this. One of the bishops celebrate like a mass behind a newspaper or something, and it was like, wasn't it done there? Wasn't that the?
Yeah. So the the John Paul II's consecration was very similar to one of the consecrations that Pius XII carried out. In fact, you can go on YouTube and you can watch the consecration. And from what I heard, I remember the story that I heard in Rome is that John Paul II, and of course we don't have access to these files as far as I know, but that John Paul II got notarized letters from every bishop of the world. This was the third. I think there were 2 times where he tried to do the consecration and he didn't carry it out properly. And I think Lucia told him that. And then the third time he got notarized letters from every bishop in the world saying that each bishop saying that he would be united with John Paul II in the consecration. And then he did a consecration in St. Peter's Square. You can see it on YouTube. You can see
It's powerful.
I remember at least a few years ago I was watching it.
Yeah.
And the one thing that he leaves out in that consecration, he doesn't mention in the actual text of the consecration, the Russia is there. But in the public, when he publicly did the consecration in St. Peter's Square, he didn't mention Russia, right, by name. And so there are some who say, well, because he didn't mention Russian by name, therefore that consecration wasn't valid, right? But again, the story that I heard in the 1980s is that Lucia responded to him, and Lucia said that the conversion, a great war has been delayed or averted, and that you can see the conversion of Russia is beginning, right? That message, whether that message, there are some people that think that you can already start to see the lessening of persecution back in the 1950s. But definitely, Lucia says in the 1980s to John Paul II, you're going to see now the beginning of the conversion of Russia.